A Duke Makes a Deal by Matilda Madison.
Silas wasn't sure if he should have explained his problem to Clara before agreeing to escort her on a walk through Hyde Park. What had seemed like a completely plausible idea yesterday now seemed impossible. For whatever reason, being in Clara's presence had given him a false sense of security, and he had foolishly believed he could handle the crowds of Hyde Park when she had suggested a walk. He was never going to get through the next hour, let alone manage to keep his composure under the curious eyes of the ton. He stuck his fingers into his vest pocket and fished out a watch as he waited for in the Woodvine foyer. 10:15. He had purposely come early before the fashionable hour so he could avoid the largest of the crowds. Perhaps Clara wouldn't mind if he had remained quiet during their outing. He would need to concentrate on his breathing to stop himself from experiencing the panic that often settled in when he was in public. Just then, voices sounded from the top of the stairs. Turning, he saw Clara, dressed in an overly embellished maroon and cream striped walking gown, followed by her mother, who wore a similar style dress. Who in the world was their seamstress? He wondered as his face remained blank upon their descent. Your Grace, Mrs. Woodvine said, coming up to him. We are so grateful to be in your company this morning. The pleasure is all mine, he said, his eyes fixed on Clara. Shall we? Yes, the ladies said in unison as they moved around him. They were out of the house and into the carriage in a matter of minutes. Silas tried to make small talk with the mother, but the closer they got to the park, the warmer his body became. His clothing seemed stifling and too tight. He thought absently as his gaze drifted out the window. Good Lord, why were there so many people here? The sidewalks and roads seemed to be overrun with bodies. Did people really come together at the exact same time each day simply to gossip? Your Grace? He said, turning back to his companions. The mother had an expectant expression on her face, while Clara tilted her head, her eyes seemingly going right through him. He shook his head. I beg your pardon, Mrs. Woodvine? I was wondering if you were attending the races next week, she asked, evidently repeating herself. Mr. Woodvine and I had never actually been, and we had planned on going until, well, Mrs. Woodvine glanced at her daughter, and Silas saw Clara blush with displeasure. She means until I caused a scene, Clara said honestly. That's not what I meant, dear, her mother said. It's quite all right, mother. His Grace happens to be on our side. Her eyes flickered to Silas's face. Aren't you? I am, he said, his tone deep and honest, before turning to face Mrs. Woodvine. I actually don't believe a word of what was written about Miss Woodvine. The older woman sighed with reprieve. Well, that is a relief, she said, her shoulders dropping a fraction as she watched her daughter. I don't know why they wrote those lies. I mean, Clara did speak somewhat loudly, but she certainly didn't scream, and no one fainted. Thank you, mother, Clara said, slightly embarrassed. The corner of Silas's mouth turned up at her discomfort. Evidently, she wasn't as calm and collected as she often appeared. Turning to peer back out the window, Silas's good humor vanished as the carriage came to a stop. The door was opened by the footman, and when Silas didn't move to exit, he felt the Woodvine's eyes on him. Silas, Clara whispered, low enough that her mother couldn't hear, but it seemed to echo in his ears. He watched her steadfast eyes, and he felt the erratic speed of his heartbeat begin to slow. Clearing his throat, he shook his head and climbed out of the carriage. He did not turn around, though he was sure a number of people were watching him as he waited, first to help Mrs. Woodvine out of the carriage, and then Clara. When they were all out, he took a deep breath and offered his arm to Clara. She slowly slid her gloved hand into the crook of his arm, and they turned to follow the wide stretch of path that led into the overcrowded park. Silas felt his mouth dry as he kept his eyes on the tree line. His legs felt stiff and gel-like at the same time, and he knew he would soon be awash with the terror that gripped him every time he came out in public. Only this time, as he felt himself trying to float away to internal panic, the small warm grip of Clara's hand held onto him. Are you all right? She whispered, leaning ever so slightly towards him as they walked. Yes, he said gruffly. Are you quite sure? You seem unwell. Unwell was an understatement. He felt as if a stone was pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. I'm fine. It would be all right if you were unwell, she continued as his panic began to melt into irritation. I would understand it if you wished to turn back. We're not turning back, he bit out in a harsh whisper. Hopefully his tone had scared her off from asking whatever. I wonder if you're coming down with something, she continued. He looked at her out of the corner of his eyes and noticed that she was facing straight ahead. His eyes darted around them, and he realized that nearly everyone they had passed was staring at them, all while Clara prattled off about illnesses. Was she worried about him? Surely not. And yet he wondered if he could tell her about his damned anxiety. Would she be understanding, or would she politely smile and nod at his confession while plodding away to escape their arrangement? He turned his head and listened as she tensely chattered about this and that. His own anxiety seemed to dim as he gently squeezed his arm around her hand. "You're nervous," he said lowly, and as he bent down to her ear. Clara turned to face him, her bright, clear eyes catching his as he felt a drop in his stomach. What was the matter with him? "If I admit I am, will you tell me what's wrong?" He didn't wish to tell her, but then something in her steady gaze gave him confidence. He exhaled slowly as they walked. "I have an issue being out in crowds like this," he said so quietly he doubted she could hear him over the conversations around them. He bit his tongue before continuing, suddenly bitter by his own weaknesses. "It makes me uncomfortable." When Clara didn't answer, he was sure she believed he was some kind of pitiful fool. How could a man of his size be made to feel uncomfortable in crowds? Her fingers squeezed against his bicep, and he felt the strangest of surges go through him. It was a small reassurance, he knew, but it had surprised him. "Is that why you've not attended anything for the past year?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he answered. She was quiet for a moment before turning her face to him. "Well, if you stay close to me, I'll keep you safe." Silas let out a gentle huff of laughter. What a ridiculous thing to say. She was shorter than him, and while he did not think she was weak, the differences in their physical power were evident. It was preposterous to think that this woman could keep him safe from anything, and so he laughed, but Clara did not. His brow creased. "You're serious?" "Very much so." "And how would you be able to keep me safe?" "Distraction," she said, as they slowed their steps, coming to a particularly crowded section of the Christian path. "If you feel weary about crowds, you might only focus on me, and in doing so, forget that there are people around." "And you think that would work?" "It's working now, isn't it?" she asked. Silas wasn't able to argue with her.
Marigold and the Marquis by Meara Platt. So today you're reading from Marigold and the Marquis. Do you want to set up the book or the scene at all?
Okay, yeah. So first of all, I don't know if your readers can see it. It's probably going to come out backwards or mirror image, but it's book 9 in the Farthingale series, which is set in Regency, London mostly, on this charming little street called Chipping Way. And the joke, there's like a little running joke throughout it. It says the bachelors who walk down Chipping Way, they're toast. They're not going to be bachelors anymore because they encounter these little Farthingale heroines who are just making their debuts. And usually their meetings are, nothing ever goes smoothly. Their meetings are usually there's something dramatic happens, and the poor hero just doesn't know what hit him, what hits him. And so I guess I'll read. So now this is like number 9. Marigold is the latest Farthingale heroine. They're very cute. They're sweet. I write innocent females, but the males are pretty alpha. And so I guess we'll start. This is in Chipping Way and in April 1825. So
Awesome.
Leonides Poole, Marquis of Muir, had been warned about moving on to Chipping Way, one of the loveliest streets in Mayfair, for it had become known as a parson's trap for the unwary bachelor. He had dismissed the notion as preposterous until this very moment, when a breathless and utterly stunning young lady ran into the garden of his townhouse at number 2 Chipping Way on what was a crisp and pleasant spring day. He watched from his study window as the little whirlwind in blue muslin lunged and leaped amid his shrubbery, attempting to catch a swiftly moving. What was that? A skull she was chasing? Sterling, who is that odd young lady? His usually staid butler peered out the window and immediately chuckled. That would be Miss Marigold Farthingale, my lord. I believe her father is cousin to your neighbor at number 3, Mr. John Farthingale. He and his wife are sponsoring her come out. Well, she is certainly out there, isn't she? What in heaven's name is she doing? A twinkle sprang into the stoic butler's eyes. I have no idea. Shall I assist her? No, I'll go to her. Leo buttoned his waistcoat in order to make himself moderately presentable, and then walked out of his study. He had purchased the townhouse only a month ago, and the house was still sparsely furnished, although the rooms he had attended to were handsomely decorated, but not overly elegant, since he had no wish to live in a museum. A man ought to be comfortable in his own home. Was he not desperate for that elusive comfort? There were no dark curtains shutting off light to his rooms, and no windowless rooms to remind him of a prison cell. He strode through his parlor and out the matching glass doors leading onto his terrace, scanning the professionally landscaped garden in search of Miss Farthingale. A moment's disappointment washed over him when he did not see her, nor did he catch sight of her when he stepped out onto the grass and began to peer through the flower beds. Had she run back home? Suddenly the skull tore past him. Chasing after it was the angel in blue, who was so intent on her mission she did not watch where she was going and ran straight into him. Oof! Goodness, where did you come from? I did not see you there. How could she miss him? He was built like a block of stone. Blue eyes the color of a tropical sea and framed by velvet black lashes stared up at Leo as he wrapped his arms around her to keep her from losing her balance and tumbling into one of the thornier flower beds. What are you? I shall explain later, she said, pushing out of his grasp and now attempting to dive into a nearby patch of rhododendron. Oh, no, you don't. You'll tell me now. He caught her by the waist before she disappeared within the greenery, turning her to face him. He now managed a good look at the girl. Blessed saints, he suddenly forgot to breathe. Gad, she was exquisite. Not a sophisticated tongue beauty at all, but beautiful in an ethereal fairies dancing amid the bluebells way. He smothered the urge to grin, for her features could only be described as part angel and part imp. Mostly imp because of her big eyes and slightly pointy ears. Who are you, and why is your skull running circles around my garden? In his entire life, Leo did not think to ever ask anyone this question. It was absurd, but also wonderful, because he was in desperate need of just this ridiculous intrusion in his life to make him feel alive again. Sir, I do apologize, she said with a lick of her cherry lips, the gesture immediately putting his heart in palpitations. A light breeze blew a few dark curls across her brow, but she merely shook them off while he still held her. I am your neighbor at number 3, Miss Marigold Farthingale. A pleasure to meet you. May we dispense with the introductions for the moment? Please let me go. I must stop Mallow before he buries my treasure. Treasure? Since when were skulls prized as such by anyone other than ghouls who crept into cemeteries at night to steal them? The skull darted out of the rhododendron and leaped into his forsythia. The lovely Miss Farthingale moaned, squirmed out of his grasp again, and was about to plunge headfirst into the forsythia when he stopped her by wrapping an arm around her waist and drawing her solidly up against him. I forbid you to destroy my flower beds. She turned to face him, frowning up at him. Sir, I shall never catch him if you insist on holding me back. He was no coxcomb, but women usually enjoyed being in his arms. This young woman was paying absolutely no attention to this fact, nor did she seem to care he was a marquis. Instead, she cast him a look of irritation before peering over his shoulder to shout at the now barking skull. Bad dog. Oh, you are a very bad dog, Mallow. Leo sighed and waited for her dog, a little fellow who could be no bigger than the size of a squirrel, to dart past them again. Mallow, sit, he commanded in his most authoritative voice. The skull immediately came to a halt on the grass beside them. Well done, Marigold said, now casting him the softest smile, before kneeling beside this thing that appeared to be a head, but not of any creature Leo recognized. She popped it off Mallow and then sank down on the lawn and tucked her legs beneath her shapely bottom. She took both her dog and that bizarre oddity onto her lap. Mallow turned out to be a little spaniel with a big attitude. He growled as Leo knelt beside him and his mistress. Leo shot him a look of caution to establish that he was the dominant male in this relation. Fortunately, the dog quickly acquiesced. We shall become good friends, you little knave, he said, giving Mallow a gentle rub to his belly before turning his attention to the exquisite girl. Would you mind explaining what that was all about?
Letters to Her Love by me, Katherine Grant. This is an epistolary novel, so it sounds a little different. July 11th. Menu for luncheon. Serve as a picnic at the pond. Cold steak pie, cauliflower ragout, potato croquettes, spinach and eggs, macaroni salad, berry pies. July 11th, 1819. My dearest mother, the party at Northfield Hall is well underway. Today, we toured the grounds. It is a well-planned estate with fields allotted for the various crops to keep everyone fed and clothed. The animals are well tended, as are the laborers. That said, I spotted several opportunities for efficiency. For example, any laborer who is married is eligible for a private cottage, which has resulted in a significant area of the land being allocated to private housing. If it were mine, they would all live in the lodging houses, with suites created for families as needed. Of course, I kept this to myself, but I am making notes for our new manufacturing works. Most thrilling to you, I am dining with the best of society, including the Duke and Duchess of Herefordshire and the Countess of Pemberley. There are no young ladies, aside from our hostess, unfortunately, but I was delighted to discover that Mrs. Zelio has joined us. Do you remember her from Rodelinda in '09? She is just as beautiful as before. More so, for now her figure is more womanly, and her sensibilities calmer. After our tour today, we picnicked near the pond, which is what they call a charming though small lake at the confluence of a few of their fields. I sat with Mrs. Zelio, and she took great interest in my plans, for which you will recall she displayed little regard when we met her in London. I expected she would be among the flighty creatures begging to go off for a walk through the woods after the meal, but instead she remained behind with the governess so that the rest of us could explore the grounds without feeling that we had left anyone behind without a companion. While I have been hoping to make a good match with a good family, marrying a woman such as Mrs. Zelio would cause just as much of a stir in the newspapers and might end up being far less demanding to my long-term plans, not to mention the cachet I would have at the club with an opera singer as my wife instead of my mistress. What do you think? Could you welcome an opera singer as your new daughter? I remain, as always, your beloved son, Fletcher Fairhead, owner, Fairhead Glassworks. From Louisa Hoggart's journal, July 11th. 3 more pages written about Mary and Oliver. They have found their way down the mountain, but now I must determine what their just natural punishment will be. Still no letter from London. I cannot tell what Elena is about. Does she consider me a mere friend, one with whom she can share confidences but not kiss? Or does she, like me, feel some deeper current of energy flowing between us? This morning I was resolved to remember that it was the former. I did get some sleep, and it was enough to clear my mind to see that just because I want to kiss her doesn't mean she wants to kiss me back. Even if I fall desperately in love with her, I cannot expect her to return even a fraction of my feelings. I went so far as to put on father's ring, so that each time I looked down at my hands, I would be reminded of his stern lecture. You must not expect love of that nature from another woman. I was glad to be wearing it when we started the tour of the grounds. Elena did no more than smile at me before lacing her arm through Lady Pemberley's. They hung in the back of the group, while the Duchess of Herefordshire drew me into conversation about how to incorporate lessons on the natural world into formal education. This is not to speak ill of the Duchess. She is a kind lady with good questions about how best to rear her 4 children, 2 from her first marriage and 2 belonging to the Duke. Under other circumstances, I'm sure I would have enjoyed the conversation, especially as it turned to discussions of the monthly salons she hosts with Lady Gresham, for women of good breeding to debate politics. As it was, I had to devote every ounce of concentration to not thinking about Elena. She wore a yellow day gown that emphasized the shine in her dark hair and the crimson of her lips. Or perhaps that was rouge smudged on with precise skill. Either way, she was a vision, but not a vision for me to ogle. When I did look back, for how can anyone keep from glancing at the object about which one cannot stop thinking? She turned away as soon as our eyes met. Not in an unfriendly way, but in such a way that reminded me she had not been thinking about kissing me senseless last night. Lord Preston gave the short version of the tour, which is to say we followed the main paths to see the lodging houses, the trade village, the northern fields, and the textile works. I stayed outside to avoid a headache from the noise of the clattering looms. We finished around noontime at the pond, where the footmen had set up picnic tables and the maids had carried out a cold luncheon. Again, I looked down at my ring for fortitude, and again I was glad I did. Elena elected to sit between Miss Caroline and Mr. Fairhead, a businessman who was clearly eager to make good connections. As for me, I sat with Lord Preston and Mr. and Mrs. Gilliatt. I should have enjoyed the table very much, as Mr. Gilliatt lives living as a portrait artist and had all sorts of delightful yet incisive anecdotes to share. Here is proof of how little my attention remained with the table. I cannot remember a single one of his stories now. Only a few hours later, I was still picking at my food when the others broke up into small groups. Mr. Fairhead asked Lord Preston for a tour of the lodging houses, to which Lord Preston eagerly agreed. He is clearly trying to influence Mr. Fairhead into prioritizing the laborers of his manufacturing works. Others decided to follow the path that leads into the forested western acres. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, in fact, but somehow I looked up from my macaroni salad to discover that only Elena and I remained at the picnic tables. Don't feel as if you need to remain behind on my account, I said, trying my best to sound unaffected by the fact that we were now alone. My feet are tired. Yet she rose, crossed the distance between our tables, and took the seat directly beside mine. I am happy sitting here, looking at the water. The pond does not present a particularly remarkable view. It is, in fact, a glorified draining ditch, though it is deep and wide enough for a party to swim in it on the hottest of summer days. At the moment, we were set up looking across the water to the beautiful grove of lilac trees on the southern bank and blooming hydrangeas on the east. And of course, I wasn't going to object. My daughter is at the seaside, Elena volunteered. I like to think of her walking along the water. It is good for the soul, don't you think? I agreed. We talked about her daughter more. Beatrice is almost 9, and it is clear that Elena is both extremely proud of her and extremely anxious about her future. I can't blame her, as there are few options available to the natural daughter of an earl. If Elena can find a new protector, perhaps, or even a man who would marry her, then she might hope for a decent marriage match for Beatrice. Otherwise, Beatrice will likely need to follow her mother into the opera or ballet or some other artistic trade that doesn't peer too closely at parentage. None of that was said expressly, of course. Elena told me about how talented Beatrice already is at singing, dancing, and acting. Beatrice likes to write her own plays, apparently, and perform them, even if it means she must act every part. This brings Elena great delight. Recounting one such production, her smile was so big and bright I thought it might blind me. When I asked about her education, it came out that Elena has been teaching Beatrice herself. She knows how to do basic sums, and she can read and write in English, Italian, and French, at least as much as any child can. But I'm afraid I didn't need Elena to finish that sentence to understand what she feared. An opera singer would not have much education in history, natural sciences, or mathematics. Not that the natural-born daughter of an earl needs that kind of education. Yet Elena is fast approaching the limit of what she can provide Beatrice, and once it is surpassed, the girl's childhood will be defined by what she does not have instead of what she does. If we are both in London next year, I said, knowing that I shouldn't, perhaps I can find time to provide Beatrice instruction. Elena looked at me as if I had offered her £100,000. But surely you will have your own charges to look after. It seemed too much to explain my scheme to her at that moment. Who knows what the future will hold? She reached for my hand, the way she had last night, the way she had when I had ended up spilling soup all over her. Clearly, it is a mere gesture of hers. When she feels a connection with someone or wants them to feel connected to her, she creates a physical connection too. She's not flirting. She's not expressing some deep yearning the way I would be if I reached out for her hand. Still, after spending all morning trying not to take inappropriate notice of her, the touch set me on fire. I gasped out loud as her fingers, warm and soft, landed on mine. I must have jerked too, for she ran her dark eyes over my body. You have a knot in your neck? The moment she suggested it, I did feel tension in my neck. The muscles between my shoulders and my head suddenly felt unbearably tight, no doubt from trying so hard to sleep last night. I suppose I do. In a fluid movement, as graceful as a pirouette, Elena rose to stand behind me and placed her palms on my shoulders. Oh, the sensation was exquisite. To be touched by her, to be cared for by her. What hope did father's ring stand against such a gesture? I hope you enjoyed these story samples. We'll be back next week with more Regency Romance story excerpts, and on August 7th, we will have the regularly formatted episode with best-selling author Elizabeth Everett. Don't miss any episode, so make sure you subscribe to the Historical Romance Sampler on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever it is that you listen to this episode. Thanks so much and happy reading!